So, the interview took place, and today, February 8, 2024, Tucker Carlson promised to provide it to the venerable public. The audience held their breath and nervously bit their nails, naturally not the entire audience, but the one to whom this interview directly concerns. In just one day, Carlson's video announcing the interview was watched by more than 84 million people on Tucker's personal page on the X social network alone, which means that the interview itself will be watched by several hundred million, including those who fundamentally dislike Tucker himself. Here's what's important to understand before watching the interview itself. Firstly, the dialogue between various groups of elites of the three centers of power, Russia, China, USA, does not stop for a minute. Secondly, this dialogue is always secretive and quiet. We see its echoes in events. For example, the closure of U.S. consulates in Ekaterinburg and St. Petersburg is precisely the consequence of such dialogues in which common ground was never found. And since the opponent persists and always gets into fights, Russia had to radically cut his food supply in the country. As a result, the relocants no longer pose a threat, and even their high patrons in the power structures are reluctantly forced to sign the new dictatorial laws. In particular, about the confiscation of property acquired through backbreaking labor by opening one's mouth to soundtracks. America has its own rattles. We'll talk about them a little later. Now we are only interested in the message that Putin voiced during a two-hour conversation with an American political observer, and we will listen to it very seriously and carefully. It contains a number of criteria and conditions that the West must fulfill to end the direct confrontation with Russia. Thirdly, the West is no longer able to stand the confrontation. This can be seen in the quarrel in the U.S. Congress, where Republicans over and over again reject the attempts of Democrats and the old man with dead batteries to push through the agenda in any way. It has gotten to the point that they are already openly talking about the real deadline for approving the federal budget in May 2024 and before that. The United States will be on a temporary scheme that does not provide for third-party spending on all sorts of stupid things like Ukraine. Why May? Because on March 31st, the term of office of Mr. President of Ukraine expires, and on May 20th, he is required by law to transfer power to the person elected in his place. Since elections are not expected in Ukraine in March, in May the Kiev authorities will lose even the illusion of legitimacy, and no one will conduct any negotiations with imposters. At least from our country. From the point of view of international law, Mr. President becomes a bully and a usurper, and Putin is an outstanding lawyer and Democrat. What else can you look for? By the way, this is not a joke. By the way, the article about the interview was supposed to appear in the evening, but the author was waiting for news from one curious state of the United States of America, and he was right. Expectations were not only justified, it was a sensation, and a sensation that America had never seen before, and, frankly, the author is somewhat confused. Voters not only surprised everyone, they probably surprised themselves at the effect they had. So, let's look at the results of this epoch-making event. Nikki Haley, 31% of the votes. Candidate for none of the presented candidates, 63% of the votes. That is, more than 44,000 people cast their votes for the second one, which is twice as many as the votes for Nikki Haley, and according to the law of the state of Nevada, Mrs. Nikki flies out of the primaries with a crushing score. This means, by law, again, that the Nevada Electoral College under no circumstances will be able to cast its votes at the Republican National Congress for Mrs. Nikki. That's what's important. It wasn't Nikki Haley who lost, it was the elite group behind her who lost. And now a serious question arises about the financing of Mrs. Haley's further election race. If she cannot win even where Trump is not, what kind of Republican president in a skirt can we even talk about? Carlson's arrival in Moscow and his interview with Putin is a very fat black swan. Not even a swan, but a flying and fattened piglet in morning plumage. All these mantras about Russia in isolation are not worth a damn if Putin breaks through the isolation with just one conversation with an American journalist, and breaks through the isolation specifically in the West and not in third world countries, where almost everyone knows about him anyway.